What's up, everyone? This is Corey Porter back with another video for y'all today. So today we're going to be taking a look at more Final Fantasy VII Remake theories. Particularly, we're going to be looking at crosses, because I'm probably losing my mind, and maybe this is relevant, maybe it's not. You can't really tell anymore. You know, this time last year we were analyzing a potato chip bag and a dog, a fictional dog. So, you know, who knows? But anyway, this is taking a look at my theory on the 3 timelines that are now happening within Final Fantasy VII Remake, and the surrounding world, whatever you want to call it, based on information from Final Fantasy VII Remake Intermission, particularly the ending with you-know-who. Here's your spoiler warning in 3, 2, 1. Zack's alive somewhere, and I have reason to believe he's not in our current timeline. And we've got some stuff to kind of back that up. So let's go ahead and get on into it. All right, so first, and pardon the not super great quality of some of these images, I'm pulling these from, you know, clips of old games, particularly like Crisis Core and original Final Fantasy VII. You know, it is what it is. But this is going all the way back to Crisis Core. So in our sequence of events, this is our first kind of landmark to kind of show some things. In particular, we're going to be looking at the cross right here in between Aerith and Zack. Notice the color. It's brown. Okay, great. All right, now we are going into PlayStation 1 Final Fantasy VII. And you will also notice the cross, brown. So we are still following along the same time frame of Crisis Core goes into Final Fantasy VII OG. We have a cross in Aerith Church. It's brown. Fantastic. Okay, moving on into Advent Children. Here we are in Aerith Church. We have a cross. It's not, I guess, I keep calling it a cross. It's not necessarily really a cross, but an X cross or whatever you want to call it, but it's present. Keynote there, it is present. It is physically there. We do notice the color is different. We can kind of infer based on the time frame, because this is after Final Fantasy VII, after Aerith has already died. The church in and of itself is a little worse for wear. You know, you can kind of theorize that this is probably, most likely, the exact same cross. It's just over time, it's gotten dirty, it's gotten dusty, it's gotten old. You know, there's not been a caretaker there like Aerith was to kind of keep things in order. But for the purposes of this video, we're just going to say this is the exact same cross that we've seen in the prior 2 images, particularly going back to Crisis Core, right? Okay, so that's all well and good. Now we are in Final Fantasy VII Remake. This is pre-intermission. We are in the same church. Obviously, there are some aesthetic differences, and that's largely based on, you know, artist discretion, things like that. But generally, for the most part, it's the exact same layout. You'll notice here in that cross area, there is not a cross. There is an imprint where one potentially might have been, or there was never a wooden one in particular there, but you know, we've got a discoloration here, whether intentional or not, but that is the exact same shape that we are seeing in all of our other, instances, right? It's the exact same shape. Roughly, it's in the exact same spot, except this time there's actually no wooden cross, okay? Wonderful. So now we get into where it gets interesting. We get into Final Fantasy VII Intermission, where Zack is walking into the church on his attempt to communicate with Aerith, and we get back to this spot, and what do we see? There's a cross. It's wood. It's brown. It's theoretically wood. Maybe not, but it's brown. It's physically there. Going back into Remake, it's not. Same scene. I mean, same location. Everything else is the same. One has a cross. One difference. One doesn't. Now, I guess you could notice here that these little panes have no color. I think that has more to do with just how the light's reflecting it off at that particular moment. But there's no color here. I mean, there is color here. So this, if it's not the exact same, it's similar to the one that we saw back in Crisis Core, which we also saw in OG Final Fantasy VII, and eventually would see in Advent Children. Now, why is this relevant? Well, there's a lot of people thinking that whenever we get into intermission, based on what happens at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake Vanilla, whatever you want to call it, we have some type of time convergence. I've even talked about this in previous videos, that maybe what we're seeing, the Zack we're seeing in intermission, is in our current timeline, the same where we were, where we saw Cloud, Aerith, Tifa, Barrett, Red 13, and Kime, right? That would be reasonable to believe, right? Unfortunately, none of this is reasonable because Final Fantasy VII bullshit, whatever you want to call it, but now we're looking at crosses and to kind of differentiate things. Now, so we're kind of weaving together some pieces here. We know that the church exists in all the versions of the game. This general area right here, at the head of the chapel, whatever you want to call it, has the cross, either a physical one or the shape of one, as per remake, because it is lacking that. And I think this is relatively definitive in saying that we're dealing with multiple timelines here. Zack is not in our current timeline. Now, it's easy to say, like, oh, it was just a misstep, or oh, yada, yada, yada. Like, here's my thing. If this Zack was intended to be in our timeline, they would have just reused the assets, generally speaking, from Final Fantasy VII Remake. And so this cross wouldn't be here. This cross is specific. We see it. This is still going back to that stupid stamp potato chip bag. So all the way to get into, here's where we've got 3 timelines. We've got the original timeline. This is where our Sephiroth comes from. Or at least some of the Sephiroths we see, one of the Sephiroths we see theoretically in Remake Vanilla. This is where Advent Children happens. We stop Sephiroth twice. Meteor hits, so on and so forth. This is what we know. This is Crisis Core through Advent Children. Now we have the remake. In remake, we have no cross. Okay, see? No cross. And then in the third timeline, which I am currently dubbing the Zack Lives timeline, potentially Aerith's dead, based on other theories that we've kind of speculated here on the channel. Again, we got the cross back. Now, I guess it could be reasonable to maybe think that there's only 2 timelines, original and remake, and that we've gone back and changed the original. To me, that doesn't make very much sense, for a couple different reasons, just based on circumstantial time travel and how all that kind of stuff works, generally speaking. That if we were to change things that would affect the original timeline, there's a very good chance the Sephiroth that we're dealing with later is affected, or the Sephiroth we're dealing with in remake, which is theoretically the Sephiroth from Advent Children, would be different or would be affected. You could surmise that Advent Children, Sephiroth, wants us to change things, and his goal and his thinking would affect his timeline, and he would live. Or maybe he doesn't care about that, he's just worried about this current timeline and winning here. And I think the ultimate result is that now we've effectively created a third timeline, a Zack Lives timeline. We've branched. I've referred to this getting in a lot of the Loki stuff with the Sacred Timeline. You could refer to the original timeline perhaps as a Sacred Timeline, and these are branches off, the remake and the Zack Lives timeline. Kind of however you want to go. There's a lot to go here. There's a lot to digest, and we're on such a thin line of what's legitimate, and just anything could just break all this. Break everything, because literally right now we're looking at crosses and what that has to do or doesn't have to do with the existence of timelines. Again, you could surmise that original and Zack Lives are now effectively the same timeline based on what we do in remake, but I don't think that's accurate. I think we've created 3 timelines. I think we have the original timeline where for Sephiroth, everything got screwed up and he died twice and failed. We have the remake timeline where Sephiroth from the original timeline has come in and is trying to change things by screwing with Cloud and the gang and the Scooby Gang to making it to where he wins. Now, we know there's a couple things that have to happen in order for him to lose. They have to ultimately get to the point where, for better or worse, Aerith had to die in order for her to get to the live stream to activate Holy, right? That's reasonable going back to Final Fantasy VII Original, right? So if he's doing all these things to change, so the Whispers, the plot ghosts, are not stopping, the dictation of time happening, then there's reason to believe that through all of his things that Aerith doesn't die, Holy doesn't get activated, and, he wins, is his goal. I don't really know what his goal is anymore, actually. I think Sephiroth of all this is the most interesting, just because we don't know what kind of shenanigans he's trying to pull off here. I think Zack is the second most interesting thing. What the heck's going on with that timeline, which we can get into later in a separate video, but the original timeline is what it is. I don't think anything has changed from that. The only thing is that we have a wiser, theoretically, Sephiroth that knows things that he shouldn't, based on what happened there. That is currently affecting our timeline here. Obviously, Aerith has information as well. I've surmised in the past that when Sephiroth found a way to get to the remake timeline, I wouldn't be shocked if Aerith found a way too through the live stream, because they really kind of a yin and a yang to each other. Everyone really thinks about Cloud and Sephiroth are kind of the two polars here, but it's Aerith and Sephiroth. And that goes back, that's historically, it's cyclical. The Cetra versus Jenova. Now we're again into that section of, we've got the Cetra that's left versus what's, effectively Jenova's offspring, child, whatever you want to call Sephiroth. So there's a lot to go on there. And it's very interesting. The more I look at everything, I see different things, and more things are coming up. I'm like that meme with Charlie Day from Always Sunny, with all the thumbtacks and the string going kind of everywhere, just because there's so much. And literally any of this could mean nothing. This could all mean nothing. This could all just be whatever. We could not have 3 timelines. We could have 1 timeline. We could just have a remake timeline, and now Zack's alive, and the stamped potato chip bag with the different dog is a red herring, and the cross is just a misstep or a red herring. But I don't think it is. I think the red herring in the Zack's Lives timeline is just the way it's intercut to make it look like it's happening, as we're going into Kime, and as we're one place, Zack's trying to look for Aerith, and he's like, oh, where's Aerith? She's not here. And we're thought to believe that these people that are crying and upset, or upset because the plate fell, which is still rational to think. That's possible. But I think, and the more I think about it, I think we're getting into, with all these separate instances, maybe Biggs is alive in the Zack Lives timeline, but then you have to go down the rabbit hole. Okay, well, what changes? Because I think in Zack Lives timeline, Aerith's dead, and then where's Cloud? We'll get into that later on a different video, but I have a very specific theory on where Cloud is. I don't think he's dead. I know that people have talked about he's dead. I don't think he's dead. Ultimately, where I think all of this is intertwining is that Zack and Aerith can't live in the same timeline. Ultimately, they both have to die, right? But in the Zack Lives timeline, Aerith's dead. In the remake timeline and the original timeline, up to the point Aerith lives, Zack's dead. I don't think they can both exist at the same time during certain events, or that just changes things. It breaks things. It breaks them, whatever you want to call it. It messes with things. And I think that's kind of where we're going, and I think we're going to be in a collision course ultimately, I think we're going to continue on the remake path, which is going to follow a lot of the plot beats of the original timeline because it kind of has to. But there will be subtle changes, subtle differences here and there. And then in the back, which I don't think is going to be like a hugely significant portion of the game, I do not think they're going to pull a Metal Gear Solid 2 ride-in situation for us, though I would kind of love it, where we are playing a bulk of the game as Zack in his timeline. I think ultimately we're going to have some type of situation where we're going to have, really it kind of even goes back to Golden Sun on Game Boy Advance, if anyone remember those games, where we have two parties and they're kind of intersecting, right? I think we're going to have the remake group, which is our traditional Final Fantasy VII party, and I think we're going to have a Zack Lives party, which I think could be very interesting. Who would be on that party? Would we get the Turks? Would we get Reno and Rude? That would be very cool. Could we get Roach, whatever the heck his name is? Could we get Machine Gun Cloud? You know, that doesn't get a sword. I don't think so. Actually, I think that's going to happen. But again, we'll discuss that later. But anyway, guys, that's kind of where we're at. Like I said, there's just so many things going on here, and I'm trying to parse this out as much as possible and spend as much time kind of figuring out my thought process along it, because there's a lot to go on. And like I said, I could be completely wrong. I could be right. I could be nowhere even close. But anyway, that is it. Let me know what you think about all this down below, and we will see y'all next time.